Love, to her, was not just a feeling, it was a force of nature, capable of transforming even the darkest of circumstances into something beautiful. She had always believed in the kind of love that was as grand as it was simple. The kind that could weather any storm, heal old wounds, and lift his souls to places they'd never dreamed of going. But what she didn't realize was that love, pure, unconditional love, could also be the most dangerous thing of all, especially when it was built on lies. Her name was Vanessa, and she had spent her life looking for the love she'd been taught to believe in, the kind that filled the heart with warmth and made the world outside seem insignificant. Growing up in a close-knit family in Chicago, Vanessa had seen love in its various forms. Her parents, despite their differences, stayed together for her sake. Their arguments were loud, their silences longer, but there was always a trace of affection in the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. She used to fantasize that one day, she would have that kind of relationship, the stability, the companionship, the safety. But real life, as she soon discovered, was never quite as idealistic as the stories she'd heard as a child. Her first relationships were filled with the kind of passion that often burned too brightly, too quickly, and eventually fizzled out, leaving her with a sense of longing and unmet promises. She had always given herself fully to her partners, but time and again, they left her feeling used and misunderstood. There was always a part of her that wondered if love had to come with this much pain. Yet, despite it all, her heart remained open, hopeful that somewhere out there was someone who would see her for who she was and love her unconditionally. Then, she met Alexei. He was different from anyone she had ever known. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, seemed to see straight into her soul. There was something magnetic about him, something foreign, something new. His Russian accent, thick and lyrical, made every word sound like a sweet melody, drawing her in with every conversation. He was charming, with a quiet intensity that made her feel seen in ways no one else had ever made her feel. His affection was abundant, never hesitating to shower her with attention and admiration. From the first date, Alexei had a way of making her feel like she was the only woman in the world. They talked about everything, their dreams, their pasts, their futures, and for the first time, Vanessa felt like she was standing at the edge of something real. He spoke of his life in Russia, the country he had left behind in search of something more in America. It was a story that tugged at her heartstrings, the pain of leaving behind his family, the loneliness of moving to a new land. But with every story, there was an undeniable warmth that Vanessa couldn't resist. Alexei promised her that their love would be different. He promised her a future, one filled with adventure, success, and companionship. As their relationship blossomed, Vanessa felt like she had finally found the kind of love she had been searching for. They moved in together after only a few months, and everything felt like a dream come true. She had never been one for grand gestures or fleeting romances. She wanted something lasting, something real. With Alexei, she found that he was the perfect partner, caring, thoughtful, always present. Every day seemed like a new adventure, every moment an opportunity to grow closer. He made promises about their future together, about traveling the world, about having children, about living a life they could both cherish. And for the first time in a long time, Vanessa believed in those promises. She believed in him. Before meeting Alexei, Vanessa had never been the type to rush into anything. She'd learned the hard way that relationships took time to develop, but with Alexei, everything felt so right. They fit together effortlessly, like the pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting to be connected. And for the first time in her life, Vanessa thought maybe, just maybe, she had found her happily ever after. What Vanessa didn't know was that beneath the surface of this idyllic love story, there were dark, hidden truths waiting to unravel everything. But at that moment, as she lay in Alexei's arms, all she could feel was the hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found the one. It wasn't long after their marriage that Alexei mentioned his sister, Natasha. He spoke of her often, with a deep affection and fondness that made Vanessa smile. He painted her as a protective older sibling who had always looked out for him, especially after their parents passed away when they were younger. Vanessa was immediately intrigued. She had always been curious about Alexei's family. He had shared bits and pieces of his life in Russia, but Natasha, his closest relative, had never come to visit. It made sense that he would want her to meet the woman he'd married. When Natasha finally arrived in America, Vanessa was eager to meet her. Alexei was overjoyed, and there was a palpable excitement in the air when Natasha arrived at their home. She was striking, with sharp, beautiful features. But unlike her brother, Natasha had an air of mystery about her, a certain coolness that made her seem distant, even aloof. Still, Vanessa welcomed her with open arms, trying to bridge the gap between the unfamiliarity of their different backgrounds. From the start, Natasha was charming in her own way. She had a way of making Vanessa feel at ease, almost as if they had known each other for years. She spoke highly of Alexei, recounting stories from their childhood, their adventures in Russia, and the strong bond they shared as siblings. It was clear that Natasha was protective of her brother, almost fiercely so, which Vanessa found endearing at first. She would come over for dinners bearing gifts. She was always asking Vanessa how she was adjusting to life with Alexei, and if she was settling in well. Vanessa, in turn, felt honored to have her as a guest, enjoying their late-night conversations over glasses of wine, the two women chatting about everything from cultural differences to the excitement of building a future in this new country. But there were small, subtle moments that began to prick at Vanessa's sense of unease. Natasha's protectiveness over Alexei was undeniable. She would brush against him a little too often, touch his arm or the back of his neck when she spoke to him, a closeness that Vanessa had never seen between siblings. At first, she chalked it up to cultural differences, but there was something about the way Natasha would look at Alexei, with a certain intensity in her gaze, that made Vanessa pause. It was as though Natasha was always watching him, carefully measuring every interaction, as though she were guarding something precious. One evening, after dinner, Natasha lingered in the living room with Alexei while Vanessa went to the kitchen to clean up. When she returned, she found Natasha sitting just a little too close to him, her hand resting lightly on his thigh as they discussed something in Russian. The sight caught Vanessa off guard, and she quickly turned her back to hide the discomfort creeping up her spine. Her mind tried to dismiss the feeling, telling herself that they were family, that this was simply a reflection of their bond. But deep down, she couldn't shake the uneasy sensation that something was off. It was a creeping doubt, the kind that starts as a whisper but slowly grows louder, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Yet, Vanessa trusted Alexei implicitly. She had invested so much of herself into him, into them. She wasn't going to let an awkward gesture or a lingering touch make her question everything she'd built. And so, she told herself that Natasha's behavior was just a reflection of the closeness they shared as siblings. She pushed aside the uneasy feeling, choosing instead to focus on the joy of having her in their home, a guest from another world who had come to witness the life they had created together. After all, Alexei never gave her a reason to doubt his devotion to her. Their love had always felt like a fairy tale. Why would this small detail spoil it? But as time passed, the strange tension between Alexei and Natasha began to gnaw at her, a silent warning she couldn't ignore forever. The cracks in their once perfect relationship started small, imperceptible at first. Tiny details that Vanessa brushed off, convinced they were nothing more than fleeting moments of stress or miscommunication. But slowly, they began to grow, spreading like invisible fractures, slowly fracturing the world she had worked so hard to build with Alexei. It began with the phone calls. At first, there was nothing unusual about them. Alexei had always been open with her about his past, about his friends, and his family back in Russia. They would talk on the phone occasionally, and Vanessa had no reason to question it. But lately, his conversations have become more frequent and more secretive. Then came the late nights. At first, she assumed it was because of work. Alexei had always been diligent, spending long hours at the office, trying to secure his future in this new country. But as the months wore on, those late nights became more frequent, and his excuse became less convincing. It wasn't just Alexei's behavior that set off alarm bells in Vanessa's mind, it was Natasha. At first, the protective older sister dynamic seemed natural, but as time wore on, Natasha's presence in their lives became more intrusive. She would show up unannounced, offering to cook dinner, or she would interrupt their private moments, always with a knowing smile or a subtle touch that sent a chill down Vanessa's spine. Natasha had become a third wheel in her own marriage. It was in the quiet moments, the times when Alexei wasn't around, that Vanessa began to look deeper. She found herself combing through his personal things, sifting through drawers and files in search of anything that could explain the unease that had taken root in her heart. Her hands trembled as she flipped through a pile of receipts from a trip to Russia, a trip he had told her was for business. But when she found the name of a woman listed on one of the receipts, Irina, something inside her snapped. As she dug deeper, she uncovered more details that left her breathless. She found pictures on Alexei's phone, ones she had never seen before, with photos of him and Natasha, not as siblings, but as lovers. Her world started to spin out of control as the realization dawned on her. Natasha wasn't his sister, she was his mistress. But the betrayal didn't stop there. The shock hit Vanessa like a wave as she unearthed the final, shattering truth. Alexei was still married to another woman back in Russia, Irina. The woman who had appeared so innocently on that receipt was his wife, the woman he had left behind in his pursuit of a new life in America. She found this out when Alexei and Irina's marriage certificate dropped out of the hidden documents. The flood of emotions that hit Vanessa in that moment was all-consuming rage, disbelief, humiliation, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal that ripped through her chest like a knife. How had she been so blind? How had she missed the signs? Everything about their relationship, the moments they had shared, the promises he had made now seemed like a lie, a web of deceit spun with precision. Unable to take it any longer, she confronted Alexei as soon as he got back home that evening. When she confronted him, Alexei's face was unreadable at first. But as she unraveled the secrets he had so carefully concealed, Alexei's defensive walls crumbled. Slowly, the cold detachment in his eyes turned into something else, shame and guilt, maybe even fear. He confessed everything in a cold, detached manner. He admitted to the affair with Natasha, his betrayal of their marriage, but even then, his words lacked remorse. His tone was empty, as though this was just a chapter in his life that was now over, and he was done with it. But it was Natasha who truly revealed the depths of the cruelty that had been perpetrated. She appeared in the room unannounced, walking in like she had every right to be there and like she had been waiting for that moment. The smugness in her expression, the way she stood beside Alexei as if they had nothing to hide, only added to the bile rising in Vanessa's throat. Natasha, once a woman she had trusted, now stood before her unapologetically. There was no sorrow in her eyes, no regret, just a cold, calculated indifference. Natasha knew exactly what she had done. She had known that Alexei had a wife back in Russia, a life he had left behind. She knew that he was married, that Vanessa existed, but that had never mattered to her. Natasha had followed him to America, had wormed her way into Vanessa's life, playing the role of the sister while she and Alexei carried on their affair without a second thought. As the confrontation unfolded, Vanessa's mind raced, her heart aching with humiliation and rage. The shame of it all consumed her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have allowed herself to be deceived for so long? Vanessa's world had been turned upside down, and now it was time to face the reality of the consequences. The once warm, welcoming home she had shared with Alexei now felt cold, suffocating, and unfamiliar. But as the days passed, Vanessa realized that the personal devastation she had suffered wasn't her only concern. There were legal matters to address, a complex web of financial and emotional entanglements that she now had to navigate. With the help of an attorney, Vanessa began the painful process of separating her life from Alexei's. She started gathering the necessary documents, preparing for a financial settlement, and figuring out how to navigate the legal system. But the legal complexities didn't end there. Vanessa realized she had to deal with the fallout from Alexei's immigration status. His ties to Russia, the fact that he had maintained a secret life there while living in America with her, complicated the situation. She had to protect herself legally from any possible ramifications tied to Alexei's immigration status. The thought that she might be held responsible for the lies he had told, the situation he had created, felt like another layer of betrayal. But she was no longer willing to sit quietly in the shadows of his lies. She needed to take action, not just for herself, but for her peace of mind, her future, and the security of her life moving forward. The aftermath of betrayal can feel like an endless road, one that winds through emotional devastation and personal reckoning. For Vanessa, the path to healing was long and fraught with moments of doubt, fear, and pain, but it was also a path that led her toward a profound personal transformation. Vanessa's life had irrevocably changed, but she wasn't the woman she once was. The woman who had trusted without hesitation, who had believed in love without question, had been replaced by someone more resilient, more self-aware, and more determined to reclaim her sense of self. What lessons do you think society can learn from this case? Share your thoughts below. If you found this story compelling, please consider sharing it to spread awareness. Like this video, subscribe to uncover more true crime stories where deception and truth collide. Click here to watch another chilling case in our series.